Welcome to another episode of Blue Wave Pod. I'm your host, Eric Heffinger.
And I'm Soham Manik.
And today we're going to dive back into the Ohio governor's Democratic primary, and we're going to talk to Dennis Kucinich.
Dennis Kucinich. He is a household name in a lot of ways. He ran for president for the Democratic nomination in 2004 and 2008, but he's been involved in Ohio politics and politics in general for over 50 years.
Yeah, he's been a city councilman. He has been the mayor of Cleveland. He's been a state senator, and he's been in the U.S. House of Representatives, on top of running for president in 2004 and 2008.
And now he's running for Ohio governor and trying to get the Democratic nomination. But he's facing a pretty diverse and serious field, headed up, I think a lot of people would agree, by Richard Cordroy, the former head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who is probably would be considered a party favorite and has a lot of backing from party figureheads.
Sure, he's also up against Joe Schiavoni, who we had on the show earlier. And in the latest poll that came out, which there's not very many polls for the Ohio governor primary, but the latest poll, it has Kucinich and Cordroy tied right now.
Which is really surprising, I think a lot of people would say. Kucinich has always been an outside figure, but the one thing that he always has going for him is this broad base of Democratic support. I mean, this is a progressive guy who people really feel the energy for because his policies are things that get people riled up.
Yeah, he really pushes the Democratic Party in a more liberal way. I remember during his 2004 run and his 2008 run, they used the term Dennis the Menace all the time because he was trying to, mess with the whole primary situation, inject his views, which at the time seemed very liberal. But after watching Bernie Sanders and after everything that happened with the Trump election, that seems to be where American politics is heading right now, especially with the Democratic Party.
It might be his time now. It might be his time. You're right. Dennis the Menace is such a good way to put it. I mean, he's a disruptor. He really is, and I mean that in the best way. I mean, he goes in there and he doesn't follow the rules that the party set up, and even in this race, in this primary race, I think he has a lot of tough words for the Democratic establishment.
One of the big controversies around him is his work after he left Congress, and that is he took a job at Fox News as a contributor. And he made a lot of pro-Trump statements, and especially with his tweet after the inauguration, he said that it was a great speech. And a lot of Democrats would say it was very dark and scary, but he went on to argue that he believed that that's what America is facing right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I hated the speech. I really thought it painted a terrible vision of the country, and I know a lot of people felt that way. You can tell with him, with Congressman Kucinich, he's trying to tap into that same energy, right? I mean, that's that voter, the one who lost his steel job.
The one who you would think of more as like a Bernie Sanders / Trump voter, right? We thought there were two very different ideologies, but they ended up voting for both people.
Yeah, so he needs to tap into that energy and the energy of this resistance movement in general, right? That is causing this blue wave to start to gather.
I wonder if you could really grab a hold of that energy, because that anger there is very much driven by the dislike for Donald Trump. But if you're not willing to go against him, I'm not saying he's not willing to go against him in some things, but in a lot of ways he's complimentary towards him. So I'm curious to see how he can utilize that energy from the resistance and also grab those Trump voters and try to bring them together.
Yeah, and to paint in a fair light, I mean, I think he does oppose a lot of his policies, but they do see eye to eye on a lot of the trade issues, and we know right now that tariffs are obviously in the news. We're in the middle of a beginnings of a potential trade war with China, and that affects Ohio directly. Ohio has been historically a big producer of steel, and the steel tariffs are going to impact businesses here. So him talking about that and taking the stance of a more protectionist view is interesting, and we'll see how that plays out with the Democratic base. So, Congressman, thanks so much for joining us again. We want to start out, we were looking a bit back at your career, and it's pretty remarkable. You've been involved for over 50 years in so many different types of positions, from mayor to councilman to state senator to U.S. House representative, and now you're running for governor. And the first question we want to know is why the governor's seat, and why now?
This is a moment for Ohio to be able to take a leap into the future, to create jobs for all and healthcare for all and education for all. And my candidacy gives the people of Ohio an opportunity to take a forward-looking approach, a dynamic approach, an approach which challenges the status quo, to step up to the responsibility that governing has to the mass of people instead of just taking care of the interest of a few. So my entire political career has been about standing up for the interest of the public, about taking strong positions, about making things happen, about pushing the envelope on all of the items that are so important for people's practical aspirations, for jobs and healthcare and education for their children and for safe neighborhoods. And with the experience that I have, this is actually when I offer it, put it all together for the people of Ohio.
Congressman, you've been known for your progressive politics over all these years. I'm curious, with all the experience that you have, how has the electorate changed from when you started to now?
I think that we're at a moment right now in 2018 where people are beginning to get more engaged, and young people are coming back into the system to try to change it. The electorate is really looking for leadership, and they're looking for political parties to respond to their needs. One of the big mistakes the Democratic Party made years ago was in accepting corporate contributions, because what that did, it set the stage for blurring the differences between the party. So if the Democrats come up with an agenda that's not connected to corporate interests, that really incentivizes people to vote, they'll come out and vote in bigger numbers. But, that's something our party and our candidates have an obligation to do.
How does that relate to issues at the end of the day? We talk about corporate money and how it can affect campaigns and how people run for office. But when you talk about the actual issues themselves, what do you think the Democratic Party has failed to do? And why have they had some trouble in recent years, especially in Ohio?
I'll give you three areas where the party failed its constituency. Number one, in trade. The leadership of the party went for NAFTA and a number of other trade deals that have resulted in states like Ohio losing major industries and all the smaller businesses that were associated in support of those major industries. The second area was the party, unfortunately, on several occasions threw in with supporting wars that sent young men and women to in harm's way, and some did not return. That cost our country dearly in terms of the treasure of this country, that killed a lot of innocent people abroad. The Democratic Party should have gone another way and stood for peace. And then in the Wall Street bailout, leaders of our party went full in to bail out Wall Street, while Main Street suffered devastating losses, and people being able to own homes, people losing their homes, people losing the equity of their homes. And let me tell you, that really registered in communities across the state of Ohio. And so the party has to stand for something. And unfortunately, it's hard to identify what our party stands for, except in some broad, generic, nebulous terms. You stand for by taking positions on issues that relate to people's aspirations. And that's what I do. And this is one of the reasons why I have the ability to motivate our base to be able to get out and vote and to take back the governor's office.
And I'd like to dive a bit deeper into one of those issues you mentioned, which is trade. And it's an interesting one because it does affect Ohio quite disproportionately in the national conversation. And it's obviously in the news now because of the recent tariffs imposed by both us and China. What would you say to the argument that going down this route of imposing tariffs and trying to, as people would say, even the playing field, at the end of the day, hurts consumers. And at the end of the day, free trade is what allows a certain quality of living that people are used to?
Well, excuse me, but free trade does not mean fair trade. Free trade has been devoid of agreements on protections of workers' rights, protecting the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, the right to decent wages and benefits, the right to a safe workplace, the right to a secure retirement. All these things were not included in trade agreements. Free trade has been devoid of protections for the air and the water. There's no environmental protections. Free trade does not protect against violations of human rights, slave labor, prison labor. So we're looking at a trade agenda which has worked against the people. And furthermore, it has immeasurably cost the state of Ohio one major industrial plant after another, because we lost our ability to compete, because a number of these countries subsidize their exports. And so we end up, in the name of free trade, being the suckers of the world, and areas like Northeast Ohio have suffered mightily from the loss of major industries and from the absence of a trade policy that says we're going to protect our basic industries. This idea of well, we shouldn't be worried about protecting things is crazy. I want to protect steel, automotive, aerospace. I want to bring back our shipping industry. I want to see that Ohio's role as a manufacturing state is revived in a powerful way. It deals directly with our own national security, let alone our ability to rebuild our infrastructure. If we're buying products from all over the world that other people are making and we consume it here, doesn't it occur to anyone how much more sense it would make for us to make things here and buy things that we make? I'm telling you, this whole thing about trade has been driven by a mythology, free market mythology that has always worked against Americans.
We hear constantly in this debate the other side that the manufacturing jobs are never coming back. Do you believe that if you are a governor that you can entice those industries to come back to Ohio, especially the steel industries, the car industries that left Cleveland area and Youngstown areas?
Absolutely, but we need to do a few things in connection with that. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. We need health care for all. Canadians are able to make cars at $1,000 less because the people in Canada have a public health system that is similar to Medicare for all. I want such a plan in Ohio. That brings jobs back. I'll have an industrial policy to bring jobs back. I'm not giving, Ohio has a prime location in America. We have rail, air, freeway system. We have a tremendous infrastructure that needs to be refurbished. That is part of moving the goods and materials that make a state great. We also have water, by the way, which is our greatest resource for not only human health and the survival of people, but also for people locating in our areas, because access to water is part of our future. Water is to Ohio what oil is to Texas. And in the 21st century, our access to water will prove to be of great importance to moving Ohio forward as the leading state in terms of our economy. So, all this comes together. You have to look at it holistically. And I do look at things that way.
And Congressman, on that note, so how do you protect, I'm trying to think of the plan, how do you protect these old industries that are struggling and have for decades now, while also maintaining the ability to innovate? I mean, we obviously want to draw in new types of companies, new types of industries in the future, and train people and educate people to work those types of jobs as well. How can you do both while also trying to revive an old economy that as years go by, the numbers keep diminishing?
Well, let me give you an example. About 16 years ago, Cleveland was faced with what would have been a catastrophic loss of our steel industry. I found out that the company was getting ready to shut down the blast furnace, which would have meant the end of 3,000 jobs, and intervened in court. Long story short, so when we intervened, we rallied the community, brought thousands of people together. And in the meantime, because we took legal action, we kept the space open for a buyer to come in. And now in the Cleveland Flats, we have the largest integrated steelmaking company in the world, ISG, which has set the stage for Cleveland's continued economic and industrial strength. I had editorial cartoonists were belittling the effort that I was making there, showing me giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a dinosaur steel industry. But the truth of the matter is that steel products are consumed in this country as much as anywhere. We have the ability to grow our economy and I'm not ready to give up on basic manufacturing. At the same time, we need to invest in the new economy, in sustainable energy, in the businesses and industries of the future. And that's why I support our universities being incubators of this technology where we license and sell it to the private sector. We already have such proposals that are out there ready to go to the beta stage, and that needs to be pushed by the state government. So I see you develop an economy on a number of different levels. One is to hold on to what you have and promote it and sell it. And another way is to develop the new technologies, which we have the ability to do. And the most important thing is to protect the natural resources that you have, which is why I'm opposed to fracking. I'm opposed to deep injection wells. We have to protect our land and our air and our water, and we have to stop having Ohio exploited by these out-of-state bandits who are only interested in exporting products to help other economies grow, and they don't care anything about Ohio or Ohioans.
I want to move on to another subject that is near and dear to you. Every time I see you in an interview these days, you're wearing a giant F button for your F rating from the NRA. And that seems to be playing great with the Democratic base. That's a big issue with them. But when it comes to, if you win the primary here and you move on to the general, do you think that issue will still carry the day for you?
Well, yes, and let me tell you why. There is a stereotyped image of Ohioans being painted by some within our party who say that, well, rural people really, they favor assault weapons. No, they don't. They may have a great sensitivity to Second Amendment rights. I understand that. But people have differentiated and distinguished between guns that are used for hunting and assault weapons, which are used to kill people. And so, yes, I think there's resonance across the state that people are ready for an assault weapons ban, for Ohio to join 5 other states in doing that. And the reason why it's an issue in the Democratic primary is that my principal opponent, Mr. Cordroy, has unfortunately led the effort on behalf of the NRA in scuttling Cleveland's assault weapon ban in 2010 and going a step further to knock down gun laws all over the country in a case called McDonald versus the city of Chicago. And Chicago's gun laws, U.S. Supreme Court made a decision that affected every city, and Mr. Cordroy led the way with the Republican Attorney General of Texas.
The economic policies, the gun conversation, everything we're talking about here is very emblematic of what's happening in the national debate for Democrats across this country on what the Democratic Party should look like. I'm curious why you think your specific brand of liberalism will be the one that will win the day here.
Well, first of all, it distinguishes from Republicans. I mean, my principal opponent, Mr. Cordroy, is for assault weapons. I'm against it. Is the likely Republican candidate. There's no difference between him and Mr. Cordroy on that. On fracking, Mr. Cordroy supports fracking. I want to end it. The Republicans have the same position that he has on legalizing marijuana. Mr. Cordroy is opposed to legalizing marijuana, same position as the Republicans. I want to legalize it. So I've just given you 3 examples that really involve mass constituencies that care about clean water, that care about freedom, that care about public safety, and there's no difference between Mr. Cordroy and the Republicans. So I can mobilize the base of Democrats by clearly establishing differences. Republicans don't want health care for all. They don't want a Medicare for all model in the state. I do. Republicans do not stand for 2 years free college. I do. On every single issue, I've distinguished myself from the Republicans, and frankly, most of the other Democratic candidates have failed to do that. So people want a real choice. They don't want Republican light. They don't want to be told that somehow that we have to vote for someone whose approach is going to win or win voters in the middle, when the fact is there's not a lot of voters in the middle when it comes to some basic economic and social issues. So,
and that's one of the interesting things is a lot of the politics now as we see it on the ground too is all about identity. And as I'm sure you've seen, that ever since 2016, it's the energy on the ground in communities has just been growing and growing. And a lot of that has been driven by this distaste for the current administration and what they're doing. And I'm wondering, how do you harness that energy when you've had, kind words for the president, his speech and his view of the country, with the energy you need from Democrats that really focuses on a hatred for a lot of those policies?
Well, first of all, I'm not driven by hate for anything or anyone. And our party has to be driven by love for people, by a vision, by a willingness to inspire people. I have the ability to bring those Trump voters back. Why? Because they came from neighborhoods like the one that I live in. We can't be condemning people based on the choices they make. We need to offer them alternatives which make them choose us. And I can do that. Look, I was elected mayor of Cleveland by defeating a Republican incumbent. I was elected to the Ohio Senate, defeated a Republican incumbent. I was elected to the U.S. Congress, defeating a Republican incumbent. How did I do that? Did I do it by offering Republican-led policies? Absolutely not. I gave people a real choice. And when, to the extent that that Donald Trump said anything that agrees with things that I've said, whether it's on trade or getting out of these wars, he still has to keep his commitments. And I've challenged him on immigration, on the wall, on infrastructure spending, on our domestic priorities, on women's rights. So, and I'll continue to do that. That's no problem. But the one thing that I think the Democratic Party has to be careful of is separating ourselves from the aspirations of people who may have voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and not making an attempt to reach out and to pull those people back to the party. If we can do that, we win. And I'm the one Democrat who has the ability to do that, because I'm not interested in throwing people overboard because they may have made a bad choice in 2016, and or because our own party failed to inspire people and give them reasons to vote for Democrats.
Let's say we're in the future. It is the end of your governorship. You won. What does Ohio look like? What are you happy with?
Health care for all. That every Ohioan will have basic health care coverage along the lines of a Medicare for all program. That every young person will have started college tuition-free for the first 2 years. That the rights of LGBTQ will have a new resonance with state government. That there'll be a $15 minimum wage or more by that time. That we will have a new energy development going on, and have ended fracking, and have ended deep injection wells. That we will end that we will have ended the influence of all of these groups who hover around the state capitol so that they can take tax dollars for the few at the expense of the many. That we will have repaired public education by making sure that for-profit charter schools cease to exist, and that wherever charter schools do exist, it's only through the cooperation with local school boards and with the permission of voters and communities who who are actually given a choice to vote their tax dollars for a charter school in their district. That assault weapons will be not just banned, but there'll be no assault weapons in the state of Ohio. I mean, these are just some of the things that I'm looking at. And women's rights will not have to go through this continual attack in a legislature which often plays games with the rights of women to make choices and to over their reproductive health. So we really, I'm ready to, and that's a good question that you asked, because we need to, in a sense, project ourselves into the future and look back at what it is we hope to create. And I'm certainly ready to do that and more. I'm there, and I'm looking for people's support. If people will go to Kucinich.com, they can volunteer to help push this campaign forward in the next month, and to give Democrats a real choice in November. When we do that, we win. And I'm going to give the people of Ohio the most dramatically different choice they've had We're talking about really transforming the status quo in the state and making sure that people know they have a government they can count on, they can call their own.
Well, thank you for being on. We know you're running all over the place with the primary only a couple weeks away, but thank you for taking the time to call into us.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, that is some vision of Ohio he laid out for us right there.
Yeah, it's idealistic. I mean, to the point that it's sci-fi almost, right? Because if he wins the governorship, he's still going to have to contend with a Republican-run House and Senate here in Ohio.
But that vision is, I think, just fodder for a Democratic base that yearns for that type of Ohio and nation, right? I mean, he talks about healthcare, he talks about the environment. He's hitting all those buttons that people care about in a primary.
Sure, and it doesn't look like anybody can flip the House, the Senate in Ohio, in 18, but 2020, 2022, I mean, you got to start the process, right?
Absolutely. And this is going to be really important for the Democratic Party, the future of it, right? I mean, as you mentioned in that interview, this race really is the standard for the future of the Democratic Party.
I told some people that we were going to interview Dennis Kucinich, and one of the people said that they view him as a Trump of the left. I mean, I don't think that he's an extremist or doesn't know what he's doing like President Trump. Dennis Kucinich is very well experienced. He knows how to work in government. But I think what they meant by that was the fact that he really wants to create a new idea for what a politician and what a party should be. And Trump is definitely doing that on the right. Is Dennis Kucinich the guy that's going to try to do that on the left?
And I think that's one of the reasons why he mentioned that he doesn't go out there and directly criticize the president. He wants to bring in those voters. He wants to build his own coalition. And he's doubling down on a lot of these policies that the president would support, but also that a lot of Ohioans have abandoned in a lot of ways. I mean, we're talking about reviving old industries, protecting steel and manufacturing jobs, criticizing the Democratic Party for not doing that, and trying to come in and like we talked about, be a menace, get in there and start disrupting the process.
I personally have a really hard time seeing these manufacturing jobs coming back.
It's tough. I mean, that's the problem with globalization. It's just cheaper to do somewhere else. And listen, I get the whole idea. You want to have steel that's made in this country, and it'd be nice if you could do that. But for companies that buy steel and use steel in their businesses, it's just cheaper to buy it abroad. And if you want those businesses to succeed and those businesses to have jobs, they need to have cheap steel as well. It's a tough issue. There are
but the message may sell in this primary. It definitely worked for Trump to beat out Clinton here in Ohio. So maybe this will be what puts Kucinich over the edge here.
It could. It absolutely could. I mean, that, like we talked about, it's the energy out there. It's harnessing that energy. And really no one does that better than Congressman Kucinich. And when we talk about a roadmap to winning a primary, maybe it is that. This is going to be a great test in a couple of weeks here. Sure.
I mean, he's got policies for the whole state of Ohio, but when he talks, and not just our interview, but other ones I've listened to, he's primarily concerned with Cleveland, Youngstown, and Akron. Right? And those were pretty hard-hit areas when the steel industry and the auto industry up and left for the most part.
So let's see. We're a few weeks out, and the direction of this blue wave and the shape it's going to take is really going to be determined by these primary races.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see the results that happen in May in Ohio and the rest of the country as they get through their primaries.
So thanks so much for listening. You can always find us at our website, bluewavepod.com. And if you could do us a huge favor, please listen to us on iTunes. And if you could leave us a rating, we'd really appreciate it.